What if the biggest questions about a war weren't being asked on the battlefield but inside a Senate hearing room? A congressional hearing in Washington became far more than another political event. It became a moment that forced Americans to confront difficult questions about accountability, transparency, and the true cost of military conflict. At the center of that hearing was U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth appearing before the Senate Appropriations Committee to defend the administration's handling of the ongoing conflict with Iran. What unfolded wasn't simply a disagreement between politicians. It was a public examination of whether the government has been consistent in explaining why America is fighting, how much the war is costing, and what victory is supposed to look like. In this documentary, we'll examine the key exchanges from that hearing, the questions senators raised, and why this testimony has become one of the most closely watched moments in Washington this year. Number 1, the background. To understand why today's hearing mattered, we first need to understand the conflict itself. The United States entered direct military conflict with Iran earlier this year under an operation that the administration described as necessary to prevent an immediate nuclear threat. According to officials, intelligence suggested Iran was approaching the capability to produce a nuclear weapon, leaving military action as the only remaining option after diplomatic efforts had failed for decades. Preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons has been a bipartisan objective in American foreign policy, regardless of political affiliation. Successive administrations have viewed Iran as a serious national security concern. However, while many agreed on the objective, the debate has increasingly centered on something else. Was this particular war planned, communicated, and managed in a way that justified its enormous human and financial cost? Number 2, the price of war. During his testimony, Secretary Hegseth acknowledged that the conflict has already cost approximately $37.5 billion in just a few months. But that figure may represent only part of the overall expense. Military analysts often note that the direct operational costs of a conflict rarely include long-term equipment maintenance, replacement of damaged assets, overseas deployments, logistics, veterans, healthcare, and future obligations. At the same time, the administration is requesting an additional $87.6 billion in supplemental funding, with approximately $67 billion allocated to military operations connected to the conflict. Those numbers immediately became one of the hearing's central points of debate. Lawmakers from both parties questioned not only how the money would be spent, but also whether Congress had been given sufficient information about the strategy behind the continued investment. That question dominated today's hearing. Number 3, human cost. Financial costs tell only part of the story. According to information discussed during the hearing, American service members have lost their lives since the conflict began, while hundreds more have been wounded. Behind every statistic is a family waiting for answers. For military families, the most important questions are often the same. Why are we fighting? What is the mission? And when will our loved ones come home? Those questions echoed throughout today's testimony. Number 4, contradictions under scrutiny. One of the most significant moments came when senators questioned Secretary Hegseth about previous public statements regarding Iran's military capabilities. Earlier in the year, administration officials had described major strikes against Iranian facilities as having devastated critical military infrastructure. Some public statements suggested that Iran's nuclear capabilities had been effectively destroyed. However, senators pointed out an apparent contradiction. If those capabilities had already been eliminated, how could Iran later be described as presenting an urgent nuclear threat requiring a much larger military campaign? During questioning, Secretary Hegseth argued that although previous strikes had severely damaged Iranian facilities, Iran continued attempting to rebuild aspects of its program. Critics argued that this explanation raised further questions rather than resolving existing ones. Number 5, the missile question. Another issue centered on Iran's missile capabilities. Earlier public briefings had suggested that Iran's missile infrastructure had suffered extensive damage. Yet recent attacks against American positions in the Middle East demonstrated that Iran still retains significant military capabilities. Several senators pressed the defense secretary on this point. If Iran's missile systems had been largely neutralized, how were they continuing to launch attacks during the exchange? Secretary Hegseth acknowledged that Iran still possessed operational military capabilities. While military assessments naturally evolve as conflicts develop, critics argued that the public deserves clear explanations whenever official assessments change. Number 6. Oversight and accountability. One of the fundamental responsibilities of Congress is overseeing military operations authorized and funded with taxpayer money. Throughout the hearing, senators repeatedly emphasized that oversight depends on receiving accurate, timely, and complete information from the executive branch. Questions were raised about casualty reporting, strategic planning, intelligence assessments, and the long-term objectives of the campaign. Several lawmakers argued that Congress cannot effectively perform its constitutional role without consistent transparency from defense officials. Supporters of the administration countered that ongoing military operations often require operational security, making it impossible to disclose every detail publicly. The challenge, therefore, lies in balancing national security with democratic accountability. Number 7, the debate over funding. The administration's supplemental funding request extends beyond military operations. The broader package reportedly combines defense spending with several domestic priorities. This legislative approach is not unusual in Washington. Large funding bills often include multiple policy areas in order to build broader political support. However, critics argue that combining unrelated issues with wartime funding can make it more difficult for lawmakers to debate the military component on its own merits. Supporters respond that comprehensive funding packages allow Congress to address multiple urgent national priorities simultaneously. Whether viewed as practical governance or political strategy, the approach has become another point of contention surrounding the war. Number 8, the fear of a long conflict. Perhaps the greatest concern expressed during today's hearing was the possibility that the conflict could gradually evolve into an open-ended military commitment. History offers numerous examples of wars that began with limited objectives but expanded over time. As operations continue, questions inevitably emerge. What constitutes success? What conditions must be met before military involvement ends? How will policymakers determine that the mission has been accomplished? Without clearly defined answers, critics warn that military engagements risk becoming increasingly difficult to conclude. Supporters of continued operations argued that ending a campaign prematurely could leave strategic objectives unfinished and create even greater security risks. Number 9, public trust. Beyond military strategy and budget, figures lies an issue that affects every democracy: public trust. Citizens expect their government to explain why military action is necessary, how decisions are being made, and what progress is being achieved. When official statements appear inconsistent over time, public confidence can weaken. Supporters of the administration argue that wartime intelligence constantly changes and that leaders must adapt their assessments accordingly. Critics argue that changing circumstances should always be accompanied by clear communication, rather than conflicting public messages. Maintaining trust becomes especially important when the stakes involve both national security and the lives of military personnel. Number 10. What comes next? Following today's hearing, several possible paths lie ahead. Congress could approve the administration's funding request largely unchanged. Lawmakers could instead attach additional reporting requirements, demanding greater transparency regarding military objectives, casualty reporting, and future strategy. Others may seek expanded congressional debate regarding the legal authority and direction of the conflict. Whatever course is ultimately chosen, today's hearing demonstrated that many lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats, alike continue seeking clearer answers about America's involvement. Closely, today's Senate hearing was not simply another day of partisan politics. It was a reminder that democratic governments function best when difficult questions are asked openly. Military conflicts involve extraordinary sacrifices. Service members risk their lives. Families endure uncertainty. Taxpayers finance enormous commitments. In return, citizens expect honesty, accountability, and a clearly defined strategy. Whether one supports or opposes the administration's policies, today's testimony highlighted the importance of transparent oversight during times of war. As this conflict continues to evolve, the debate inside Congress is likely to shape not only future military decisions, but also public confidence in how those decisions are made. Ultimately, The responsibility does not rest solely with elected officials. An informed democracy depends on informed citizens, understanding the facts, examining multiple perspectives, and following these discussions carefully remain essential. Responsibilities for anyone concerned about the future of American foreign policy. If you found this documentary informative, consider subscribing for more in-depth analysis of global affairs, U.S. politics, and international conflicts. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to L'Oceanaro